60 years of broadcasting. Radio Clatterbridge.
A very warm welcome to 60 years to the day of Radio Clatterbridge from the heart of the health park.
Proudly broadcasting to patients and staff since 1951. This is Radio Clatterbridge.
It is Saturday, April the 9th, exactly 60 years to the day since Radio Clatterbridge was established. In the mix today, a potted history of the Clatterbridge site, some very special guests, past and present, surprises galore, requests from around the hospital, and the very best in music. It's Radio Clatterbridge from the heart of the health park. So how did a hospital actually come to be here in the first place? A bit of potted history for you now. By 1943, a former pupil of Wirral Grammar was serving in the army as a staff sergeant in the Central Mediterranean Forces. His name was Monty Lister. Good morning to you, Monty.
Good morning to you, sir.
It is great to have you back, and I've been doing my research, Monty.
I hope it wasn't too deep, but carry on, yes.
Now, you were a former pupil of Wirral Grammar. You became friends with a fellow Wirral Grammar schoolboy and a technical genius by the name of Bill Wilding, I gather.
Yeah.
And Bill had actually rigged up a room in his family's Bebington bungalow as a studio, and I gather as a lad you presented programmes there.
That's right. As you said, it was a bungalow, and he rigged up one room at one end of the bungalow as a sort of studio, and the other end was the listening area where he had his speakers and things. He was a technical genius, really was.
In 1951, a committee meeting of senior boys at the Port Sunlight Boys Club agreed that they should do something for the community in return for all the adults who were helping with their instruction for table tennis and other activities. And they decided to play music to patients here at Clatterbridge. Now, the service was founded and run by John McNeely, who was the first full-time paid warden of the Port Sunlight Boys Club. But then in 1952, I gather, John phoned you, and you were at that time in public relations at Unilever, and there was quite a pivotal phone conversation with you.
Yeah, he applauded the idea that was put forward by the senior boys that they should do something to put back into the community. And they came up with the idea of this record request programme. And it wasn't a success at first because it was done in Pensby Ward, and it was a bit higgledy-piggledy, and people at one end, patients at one end of the ward were saying, "Can't hear that, can you turn it up?" And at the other end they said, "Turn that down!" So it wasn't successful at first. But John McNeely got on to me because I was running a public speaking group at the Boys Club, and he said, "This is a good idea. It's not caught on yet, but he said, we can improve it, and if you're a public speaking instructor, you should be able to help." So that's how it happened, and I got completely tied up with the programme.
Now, I don't know, looking at my notes, Monty, if there's anybody you haven't actually interviewed. Monty Lister, what's your secret of actually getting to speak to so many of these stars?
Get to the star and avoid all the shield around them, and you'll find them very pleasant and very helpful, with very few exceptions.
Word had spread about the Clatterbridge programme, and I gather that you're starting to get letters flooding in from Cleaver Hospital. Tell us about that.
We had little items published in the Bebington News and the Advertiser requesting records to put in our own library to make it up. Incidentally, I must break off there to tell you about one particular record. I don't know whether you still have it, but you know the old sort of dinner plate size records with 78 RPM?
Yes, yeah.
This one, I'd never seen one like it before or since, was speed 81 RPM. It was as thick as a dinner plate. It had a ridge round the end, round the edge, so the pick-up arm couldn't drop off, sort of thing. And that went into the archives here. What happened to it afterwards, I don't know.
What is so funny these days, Monty, is when we have the newcomers actually joining Radio Clatterbridge, absolutely fine, immediately on the computer, I've had to put instructions up about using the turntable. Monty, you interviewed Bill Haley, and you had a very charming interview with him, but notoriously not one of the easiest people to interview.
He was difficult to get at, as it were, and so he was doing a tour of Britain, and two of the venues were Manchester and Liverpool. So, pardon me, I went to Manchester, and laid out the ground to interview him when he came to Liverpool, and I'd done that through his road manager, and he said to me, "Yeah, that's okay, you can do an interview with him when we come to Liverpool." So I said, "Well, it's not as simple as that. Could I have that in writing?" And he wrote on the back of an envelope that it was okay for Bill Haley to do an interview with me at the Adelphi in 1957, I think it was.
Yeah, that's what it says here anyway.
Oh, that's right then. And it was going to be a press do, but I'd gone to the Adelphi, and the press were gathering round, photographers and so on, and suddenly the man that I'd spoken to in Manchester, the road manager, came down the stairs and he said, "Sorry, interview's off, he's got to cut a tape." And that was my tape. He was going to talk to me, and that was the one that you've heard.
Now we move forward to 1960, and you interviewed Billy Fury, Joe Brown, Gene Vincent and Eddie Cochran at the Liverpool Empire. But I gather the recorder was plugged into one of the light sockets beside the dressing room mirror. That can't have been easy.
Most of the dressing room light sockets were screw ones, not the bayonet fitting.
Yeah.
So we had to usually find one around the mirror that we could use as a PowerPoint, as it were.
Now, by 1961, you had taken sole responsibility for the radio service, and you renamed your programme Sunday Spin.
Yeah.
And I gather in 1962, Monty, you recorded a feature on the world's first hovercraft passenger service between Wallasey and Rhyl.
Good stuff, yeah. 20th of July, 1962.
Now, on the 27th of October, 1962, yourself and 16-year-olds Peter Smethurst and Malcolm Threadgill conducted the first taped radio interview with the Beatles at Hume Hall during a Port Sunlight Recreation Association dance. How did that come about, Monty?
They'd been to Port Sunlight just a week or a fortnight before the time that I caught them at Hume Hall, and people had been talking about this new up-and-coming local group, and I thought, well, why not? We'll promote a local vocal sort of thing, and made arrangements to see them when they came to Hume Hall, and thereby hangs a tale. They had lots of friends that they brought over from Liverpool,
Yeah.
and so every few seconds they were doing the push-bar exit and letting their friends in, and security at Port Sunlight was going absolutely mad, but we got there in the end.
Before all the sort of fame really hit, what were your observations about the different Beatles, Monty?
You know, they were just a group that sounded different. And I didn't know they were going as far as they did,
No.
but there we are.
Now, on the 30th of October, during a sponsored 12-hour special where family, friends and shopkeepers got mentions for money in aid of the Port Sunlight Boys Club, the Quest collectors noticed Jerry Marsden in the maternity ward. His wife Pauline had just given birth to his daughter Yvette Louise, and Monty, you popped over and you had a bit of an interview with him.
Well, I had a word with him when he came out of the maternity ward, and then we went over to the studio and just had a quick chat with him.
And Roger, I mean, your early memories obviously of meeting Monty. Was it Monty who actually interviewed you when you first joined? You were mentioning earlier?
I mentioned earlier on that there was Worthy Taylor at the Port Sunlight Boys Club who arranged for me to be interviewed by Monty, and I think John McNeely at the time, and they came down to the Boys Club. They interviewed me and they realised that I was going to be a future upright citizen, so how foolish of them.
And Monty, you left in 1967 to join Radio Merseyside. So Roger, what was it like then trying to actually move this forward in 1967?
It was something which, as a 14 and 15 years of age, it wasn't anything I'd really thought about doing as a long-term career. And it was about 2 years on from there that Dave Williams, who's in the studio with us at the moment, contacted the hospital, and he volunteered, came down, and we had a bit of a chat, and we suddenly had 2 programmes on a Saturday morning, because we moved from a Sunday, we moved to a Saturday morning. Dave did a breakfast show, and I followed him, and then within about 2 or 3 weeks, 3 or 4 more people came along. There's guys called Brian Sumner and Phil Price, Dave Porter, and that was about it really.
And it says here, Roger, that you became station manager by accident.
We'd been doing the Saturday broadcasts and there was no formality to it. It was turn up, get the keys from the lodge, and hand the keys back in at the end of the day, and there was no format to it. And we realised that we wanted to move from the studio, which was, well, it was a prehistoric grey metal thing that the hospital had put in place with 4 radio tuners and some switches that had to go from microphone to gramophone and back again. Dave, stop laughing so much. And we needed to formalise in order to move into, well, the 21st century, I guess, by having some equipment. And in order to have equipment, we needed to have a bank account to do fundraising, and we decided to properly constitutionalise Radio Clatterbridge, and we formed a committee, and because I was the one who suggested it, I became the station manager.
Perhaps Dave Williams, if you just come round to one of the microphones. Dave, talk me through your first day here at Radio Clatterbridge.
Gosh, it's going back a long way, 1973. From what I recall, Roger was doing the only Saturday programme at that stage. Was it something like 11 till 1, something like that? And I was invited by the hospital authorities to come down and to have a look at what went on. And I remember having to crawl almost through the overgrowth outside the studio to get here. And as you say, it was a very small room which housed the record library, all the tuners that served the whole of the hospital, and a very primitive microphone and a couple of turntables. That's all we had.
They were Garrard SP25
They were
Mark
indeed,
IIs, there
yes,
you go.
yes. And the record library at that stage consisted entirely of 78s.
They were.
We had very few 7 or 12-inch records at that stage. And so I came down, liked what I saw, and I think I started the following week. Some years later, Radio City had started, that'd be 1974, and one of the very early producers was a guy called Clive Burrows, who'd actually worked for Radio 1
Yes.
and produced programmes for Eric Idle, I think.
Indeed, he did.
And he did a programme on Radio City in the days when commercial radio did all sorts of different programming, not like it is these days. And he did a programme called the 78 Spectacular every Saturday night, and so he was very interested in having a look at our collection, and I think he bought quite a few of those off us, didn't he?
The studio is pretty full as we speak. We have a whole number of luminaries. But meanwhile, out there on the wards, I'm delighted to say that Bethan and Richard and Holly have been collecting requests, and we thought it would be rather nice, Monty, if we today really went back to how it all began and ask you to read out the first request, if you would.
You mentioned Bethan.
Yeah.
She was the one who's been around the wards, and one of the wards was stroke rehab.
Yeah.
And we're calling up Barbara. Hope you're getting us loud and clear, Barbara. And I see that you requested a record by Cliff Richard. Well, before we go into it, I must tell you about the lunchtime record programmes that we used to have at Port Sunlight. You mentioned them before,
Yes.
didn't you? I managed to get some of the artists to come over and appear on stage, mime to their records.
Yeah.
We'd have competitions, and we'd give away records of the artist who was coming on stage to give away. I'd had Billy Fury, Joe Brown, Edmund Hockridge, quite a few. Emil Ford, who'd come and appeared live on the programme. And I arranged, magnificently, to have a word with Cliff Richard to see if he would come over and do the same at Gladstone the Theatre in Port Sunlight. And he said yes. He was 19 years old at that stage, and I thought, out of courtesy, I'll tell the company's secretary what's going to happen this coming Tuesday. And I went in to him and I said that I've got Cliff Richard coming over on Tuesday. He said, oh, no, you're not bringing him here. So I said, why? So he said, we'll lose the Gladstone Hall brick by brick if you bring him. So I went over to Liverpool to pick up Cliff Richard, and I said, I'm sorry that we can't do the lunchtime record programme, but would you come out to Cleaver Hospital with me and go around the wards and sign autographs? He said, with pleasure, sure. Well, that took an hour and a half or so, and I had him for the rest of the day. I thought, well, what am I going to do with him now? So I took him home, and we played records for most of the afternoon, and he enjoyed the visit, and I enjoyed the stardom.
I gather your mum found him very polite as well.
Oh, yes. But you couldn't say a word against Cliff Richard to my mother, because she made coffee for him, and he was so polite.
Barbara,
But
I can't follow that.
Richard, we're thinking of Barbara right now.
Absolutely.
And she's thinking of something that everybody enjoys, a summer holiday.
Super, thank you.
Well done.